The story of Bronislaw Malinowski is one of the greatest tales in anthropology. Almost 100 years ago, his short visit to some remote islands of Papua New Guinea turned into a 4-year odyssey. Here, Malinowski started a revolution in anthropology. He left behind the colonial settlements to live cheek by jowl with the natives. His experience would overturn the Victorian notion of the simple savage and transform the way we look at our own society. But with the publication of his private diaries in 1967, a complex truth about the man began to come out. Who really was Malinowski, and what drove him to become the founder and hero of modern social anthropology? In 1942, at Yale University, some battered notebooks were found on top of a cupboard. They were the private diaries of Bronislaw Malinowski, the man who founded modern social anthropology. For a further 25 years, these diaries were a closely guarded secret, until 1967, when their publication sent shockwaves through the world of anthropology.
His attitude was rather unpleasant and rather superior, and not an ideal model for younger anthropologists.
The diaries from this hero was shown to have feet of clay, to be a lustful, indiscreet, arrogant, lying, racist at times. He was all the things that they wished he wasn't.
The diaries laid bare the dark side of a revered academic figure. This film reveals a man driven close to the edge of reason in his passionate pursuit not only of a new science, but of his own power and prestige. London, 1910. The bustling hub of the British Empire and the greatest city in the world. That March, a poor but well-born young Pole arrived and fell in love.
My Anglomania has become something more akin to a mystic cult, worshipping at the altar of British culture.
Fascinated by England's social structure, Malinowski desired to be part of the upper classes.
I both admire and fear the English way of life. Its elegance and refinement. Indeed, they are the very aristocracy of the nations. A highly superior nation where one is only tolerated if one is amusing.
His surviving daughter and great-grandson bear out his desire for acceptance.
There's a photograph of him at a dinner party, and he's obviously very pleased that he's with Sir Thingamy and Lord Whatnot and the Duchess of Blah, and who's to blame him? No.
Me.
You. Okay, well, you're an American. You can't help yourself.
Without personal wealth to help him on his way, Malinowski would have to rely on the one thing he did have: brains.
I'm determined that I shall be accepted into this aristocracy. The one thing I have to proffer is my extraordinary intellect. It is this that will make me important. I shall be an eminent scholar. Do you think?
His brains took him to the London School of Economics, where he plumped for the little understood subject of anthropology. It means literally the study of man. As the British Empire expanded, it encountered a world of mysterious tribes, cannibals, and curious traditions. The Victorians wanted to find a way of classifying these bizarre and exotic cultures.
Collecting objects was part of that process of making sense of human variety, and the different objects that people made and used were indicative in many ways of the sorts of societies that they had.
To Victorians, the people who made these objects appeared savage. And what's more, these savages performed magic, tattooed their bodies, and even practiced promiscuous sex. Their lifestyle sent decent Victorian folk into a spin of moral panic and terror.
In the popular mind, a savage was someone who was at the mercy of their emotions, wasn't fully in control of their rational thought, and therefore was sort of blown hither and thither by changing emotional forms. Right at the heart of the notion of savagery were both sex and violence, basically.
The study of these savages and everything they did was anthropology. Its experts were respectable gentlemen who considered the savage was best studied from a safe distance.
These were known as armchair anthropologists, people who lived in places like London, Oxford, New York, and either didn't travel very much themselves or didn't travel at all. And what they did was, often by writing letters, was to get a whole series of accounts from travellers and colonial officials, missionaries around the world, about the customs of the people that they were in contact with.
Perusing these reports in their armchairs, they formulated a theory on savage life.
The usual idea was that these people were so-called primitive people. They were more or less equivalent to the most ancient of our own ancestors. And so they must represent something which is the opposite of ourselves. If we are monogamous, they must be promiscuous. If we live in homes, they must be nomadic. If we are rational people believing in all sorts of rational things, they just are completely enthralled to superstition, believing, and so on and so on. So they are the opposite of ourselves, however we imagine ourselves.
Off on the trek into the heart of the Never Never, the expedition is nearing the country inhabited by the real bad men of Australia, wild blacks who have never seen a white, prehistoric beings sprung from a race said to be 500,000 years old.
Savages seem to be a throwback to a prehistoric past, and their primitive societies the relics of man's march towards civilization.
Almost always it was Australian Aboriginal people were seen to be at the bottom of the ladder of evolution, and then there were chiefly societies, people like the Tahitians and so on, who were part way up, and then came the state societies of the Chinese, and then laughable to us a little bit further up were other European nations like the Italians, who are said to be a bit sort of irrational and emotional, and of course right at the pinnacle of evolution were the good old rational thought